In this video, we will be revising all important points that you need to know among the poems that you have in your syllabus. We have 5 poems in class 12 this year, and of course you have your exam on Monday. What are the things that you need to know about those poems, and even the points that I have been discussing here, if you learn them and incorporate them in your answers, you will be able to score really very well. So let's begin. The first poem that we have is Telephone Conversation by Wole Soyinka. The poem Telephone Conversation critiques racial prejudice and discrimination in society by presenting a conversation between a black man and a white landlady regarding a housing inquiry. The poem exposes the absurdity and offensiveness of judging individuals based on their skin color. Now let's talk about the key elements of the poem. The poem is a powerful critique of deeply entrenched racial prejudices in the society. Soyinka uses the conversation to highlight the hypocrisy and covert racism practiced by many white people. The poem's strength lies in its ability to expose racism in a day-to-day context through an uncomfortable phone conversation. The speaker's ability to maintain composure and use language as a tool against prejudice is commendable. Telephone conversation serves as a reminder that poets from certain ethnic or racial backgrounds cannot separate politics from their poetry, as their very existence is politically charged. Now look at the themes. First and foremost, we come across the theme of racism and prejudice. The poem highlights the prevalence of racial discrimination and the ingrained mindset of certain white people who discriminate based on skin color. Next is the power of language. Language is used to create racial boundaries and reveals the political and cultural implications behind seemingly benign words. Then there is ironic detachment. The speaker's ironic and humorous tone exposes the landlady's racial assumptions and the confused politics of insensitivity, identity, and objectification. The poem explores how racial prejudice forces individuals to define and defend their identity, reducing them to mere objects of discrimination. If we talk about the literary devices that have been used in this poem, they are: first is irony and satire. Soyinka employs irony and satire to convey the anger of black people towards racial prejudice. The speaker's witty remarks serve as a defense mechanism against the landlady's rudeness. Next, dialogue. The poem is structured as a telephone conversation between a black man and a white landlady, capturing the essence of human interaction across racial differences. Look at the symbolism. The stench of rancid breath and squelching tar symbolize the unpleasant and suffocating atmosphere of racial prejudice. Free verse. The poem is written in free verse, which adds to the conversational and natural tone. Imagery. Vivid imagery such as the lipstick-coated, long gold-rolled cigarette holder paints a picture of the landlady's artificiality and superficiality. Now, the next poem, Tithonus by Alfred Lord Tennyson. Let's talk about it. Tennyson's Tithonus explores the tragic consequences of immortality without eternal youth, using the mythological figure of Tithonus to meditate on existential questions about life, death, and the human condition. The poem emphasizes the misery and isolation that come with unending life when coupled with aging. Now, the key elements of the poem. The poem is a poignant exploration of human desire for eternal life and the potential consequences of such a wish. Tennyson masterfully uses the character of Tithonus to reveal the tragic irony of immortality without youth, highlighting themes of longing, loss, and despair. The poem's strength lies in its ability to evoke empathy for Tithonus's plight, making readers contemplate the burdens of immortality. Tennyson's retelling of the myth serves as a reminder of the importance of mortality and the natural cycle of life and death. Tithonus reflects the universal human desire for connection and fulfillment, contrasting it with the isolation and suffering of eternal existence. If we talk about the themes of the poem, the first theme that we come across in this poem is immortality versus mortality. The central theme revolves around the contrast between the desire for eternal life and the reality of its grim implications when youth is not granted. Tithonus's unending decline is juxtaposed against the natural world cycle of change and renewal. Next is the burden of eternal life. The poem shows the sinister side of immortality, portraying it not as a blessing but as a curse leading to endless suffering and despair, love and loss. Tithonus reflects on his love for the goddess Eos, Aurora, but finds that even love and beauty cannot alleviate his suffering or help him escape his fate. Isolation. Tithonus experiences profound isolation as he is suspended between light and darkness, unable to connect with the mortal world or find solace in his immortal state. The poem is presented as a dramatic monologue, with Tithonus addressing his consort Eos, the goddess of the dawn. Imagery has been used in the poem. Tennyson uses vivid imagery to depict Tithonus's decaying state and contrast between his immortality and the mortal world. For example, the grey shadow reflects Tithonus's withering vitality. The horses of dawn seem to create light. Symbolism. The rejuvenating dawn underscores Tithonus's stasis and isolation. Enjambment and rhythm. Tennyson employs mournful rhythm and enjambment to evoke Tithonus's ceaseless torment. The irregular meter reinforces the anguished disjunction between Tithonus's state and the natural order. The poem is an allusion to the Greek mythological figure Tithonus. Now let's talk about the poem Beethoven by Shane Koyczyn. Shane Koyczyn's poem Beethoven explores the life and struggles of Ludwig van Beethoven, highlighting his perseverance and genius despite facing abuse, hardship, and deafness. The poem emphasizes that Beethoven's musical compositions encapsulate his essence, making his biography less important than experiencing his works. Look at the key elements of the poem. The poem is a passionate and theatrical spoken word piece that brings Beethoven's genius to life. Koyczyn's poem inspires the audience to listen to Beethoven's compositions and vividly experience his majesty. The poem acknowledges that musicians were initially confused by Beethoven, but they had to admit the power and genius of his music. Beethoven is a tribute to artistic genius that transcends time and place. The poem suggests that to truly know Beethoven, one needs only to listen to his music, not read his biography. Look at the themes. First is perseverance. The poem emphasizes the importance of perseverance, showing how Beethoven continued to strive for perfection despite constant beratement and abuse from his father. Triumph over adversity. Beethoven's determination allowed him to overcome his challenges, including hearing loss, to become one of the greatest composers. Next is impact of abuse on creativity. The poem delves into how the abuse Beethoven suffered in his childhood shaped his creativity and musical genius. And yes, the power of music. Koyczyn suggests that Beethoven's music has the ability to affect nature and touch the divine, transcending language and cultural barriers. If we talk about the literary devices that have been used in the poem, the first and foremost is anaphora. The repetition of not good enough emphasizes Beethoven's persistence and refusal to settle for anything less than perfection. Hyperbole. Coisen uses hyperboles to magnify Beethoven's accomplishments and make them more memorable, such as comparing his musical measurements to distances reaching past the towers of Babylon. Imagery. The poem is filled with striking imagery, contrasting Beethoven's difficult youth with the transcendent beauty of his compositions. Celestial imagery is used to compare Beethoven's music to heavenly bodies and cosmic events. Simile. Simile enhance the theme by illustrating the extent of Beethoven's suffering, such as comparing his cramped fingers to gnarled roots or trunks. Alliteration, rhythm, and intentional line breaks. These devices add musicality to the poem, which is designed for spoken word performance. Small Towns and the River by Mamang Dai. Small Towns and the River explores the interconnectedness of life and death through the imagery of a small town and its adjacent river, reflecting on the continuous cycle of existence and the permanence of nature amidst human mortality. The poem reflects on the cycle of life and death within the unchanging backdrop of a small town, highlighting the contrast between transient human existence and the permanence of nature. Dai's use of simple yet evocative language conveys deep emotional resonance, making the poem accessible and engaging. The poem blends personal reflection with cultural beliefs, offering a spiritual perspective on life and death. Small Towns and the River captures the essence of life in a remote, close knit community where nature and tradition play significant roles. The poem's strength lies in its ability to evoke a sense of timelessness and interconnectedness, inviting readers to contemplate their place within the larger cycle of existence. Mortality and impermanence as one of the themes. The poem emphasizes the transient nature of human life, contrasting it with the enduring presence of nature and rituals. Small towns constantly remind the poet of death due to the frequent loss experienced in close-knit communities. Next is permanence of nature. The river is personified as having a soul, representing the timeless and immortal aspect of nature through its continuous flow. The river's constant movement contrasts with the sedentary nature of the small town. Next is spirituality. The poem has spiritual undertones, blending personal reflections with cultural beliefs. The east symbolizes new beginnings, and references to walking into the house of the sun draw upon Eastern traditions where the sun represents divine power and renewal. Ritual and tradition. Rituals are permanent aspects of life, particularly concerning death and mourning in small towns. Now look at the literary devices. First is imagery. The poem uses vivid imagery to depict the small town and the river, creating a sense of place and atmosphere. Descriptions evoke both the warmth of summer, dust flying, and the harshness of winter, wind howling. Personification. The river is personified, given a soul and the ability to seek a land of fish and stars, which emphasizes its living presence and connection to the natural world. Metaphor. The poem is a metaphorical depiction of life, death, and spirituality expressed through the lens of nature. The river cutting through the land is described as a torrent of grief, symbolizing the ceaseless mourning in small towns. Repetition. The repetition of life and death creates a rhythmic emphasis on the inescapable cycle of existence. The line, the river has a soul, is also repeated to highlight its importance. The poem is written in free verse without a strict meter or rhyme scheme, allowing the thoughts to flow freely, mirroring the river's unbound journey. And yes, allusion. The river's desire to escape into mythical land may allude to folklores about the creation of the universe. Next is the poem Death Be Not Proud by John Donne. The poem's central idea revolves around the powerlessness of death and the immortality of the soul. Donne diminishes death by portraying it as a slave to fate, chance, kings, and desperate men. He argues that death is not a mighty and dreadful force, but a temporary state, a short sleep after which one awakens to eternal life. Look at the key elements of the poem. Subversion of traditional views. Donne subverts traditional views of death by portraying it as a powerless and ultimately self destructive. This challenges the fear and reverence associated with death, offering a new perspective rooted in Christian belief. Logical argumentation. The poem uses logical reasoning to dismantle the notion of death's power, arguing that it is merely a slave to other forces and that it ultimately leads to eternal life. Emotional and psychological dimensions. Some interpretations suggest the poem reflects Donne's personal struggles with illness and mortality, with his address to death serving as a manifestation of his internal conflicts. Blending of elegy and sonnet. Donne merges the themes and tones of elegies with the structure of a sonnet, creating a unique approach to contemplating mortality. Impact and legacy. Death Be Not Proud is considered an important example of metaphysical poetry, offering insight into complex questions of life, death, and faith. Its innovative use of personification, paradox, and logical argument continues to resonate with readers today. Now look at the themes. First is mortality. Donne confronts the human fear of death by introducing the Christian belief in eternal life, suggesting death is not an end but a transition. Powerlessness of death. The poem challenges the conventional perception of death as an invincible conqueror, presenting it instead as a poor death with no real control. The afterlife. Donne emphasizes the concept of eternal life after death, suggesting that death is merely a gateway to a greater existence in heaven. Now, let's talk about the literary devices. Personification. Donne personifies death, addressing it directly and attributing human characteristics such as pride. This allows him to challenge and diminish death's perceived power. Next is apostrophe. The poem employs apostrophe, directly addressing death as if it were present and capable of understanding. This creates a personal and confrontational tone. Metaphor. Donne uses metaphors to compare death to sleep and rest, suggesting it is a temporary and even pleasant state. It also uses the metaphor of death as a slave to fate, chance, and other forces, emphasizing its lack of control. Next is paradox. The poem contains a paradox in its final lines where the speaker asserts that death, thou shalt die. This suggests that death itself will be defeated and cease to exist. Alliteration. The use of alliteration can be found in the poem to add to its musicality and emphasize certain points. For example, the repetition of D sound in Death Be Not Proud draws attention to the poem's central theme. So this was all about the poems that you need to learn, and you need to write these points in your answers, especially 10 marks questions, which will be critical thinking based questions, where you will need to include the themes and critical analysis of a particular text in your answers. I hope it will help you out for your exams. Thank you. Bye bye.